Hello, Year 5, and welcome to Lesson 3 of your poetry unit for this term. Thank you for all the hard work that you put into writing your free verse poems yesterday. I would love to pull out some examples to share amongst the grid at some point in time. I did suggest to one of my students that she kept a copy of her poem somewhere safe so that we could potentially think about compiling our own poetry selection book at some point, perhaps later in the term. So that is definitely something to suggest to you all. Do keep a copy of all the poems that you write somewhere really safe, and we can perhaps put them all together later on. And I think we would have the most incredible selection of poems if we did that and be able to celebrate all your hard work at the end of term. And today we are moving on to thinking about syllables. A funny word to get your tongue around, syllables. And I know you'll all be familiar with these already, but we're just going to recap a little bit on what they are and the impact that they can have within a poem. So what are syllables? Well, technically they are an uninterrupted segment, piece of sound, which is formed by the opening and closing of your mouth when you speak. And quite often syllables then will form or create a rhythm, a beat, using claps or thinking about sounds and words in chunks. And so that's what the syllables are, those little chunks in the words that you hear individually that you can then piece together to hear the whole word. And quite often when we're speaking quickly, we don't pick up on the fact that words can be segmented in this way. But when you read poetry or speak poetry aloud, suddenly it's something you really become quite aware of, because it's really what can give a poem its life and its rhythm and its beat, like the heartbeat of the poem. Free verse, as you were writing yesterday, well, that doesn't rely on any regular rhythm, as you would have discovered. So there would have been no particular beat or pattern of syllables in your poetry that you wrote yesterday. And that, of course, makes it so much easier when there are no constraints and rules being placed upon you when you have to write something. And for that reason, I hope that you find that a really useful and fun and easy way to bring yourself back into the world of poetry. Today, we are going to attempt to write another poem, a different style of poem, and there will be a rule or two that we'll put in place, but hopefully that won't be too tricky. Let's look at some examples then of words and remind ourselves of the syllables, what they look like, how they might sound like. So these words just have one syllable, one sound: cat, boat. So you can say them out loud yourselves, actually. You can pause the video right now and say those words and think about the position of the tongue in your mouth and how your mouth opens and closes to really get a feeling for how that is one beat, one syllable. And moving on to robot, robot, or you can clap, robot. You can very clearly hear the two beats, the two syllables. And in the same way with napkin, napkin. Moving on to three syllable words: protection, protection. And description, description. So it's very rhythmic. Okay, I even discovered a 4-syllable word: caterpillar. And you can see I've showed you clearly by using the hyphen in between the letters and the words, how to separate them into the syllables. And I wished myself congratulations as I found a word with 5 syllables: congratulations, congratulations. So you can very clearly hear how poetry can start to sound almost quite musical when you think about the rhythms and the beats and the sounds, and how a poem can gather momentum and speed sometimes because of the clever use of the rhythm and the syllables. Okay. Now, one of our beautiful students, I hope he doesn't mind me having used his poem and sharing it with you in this lesson. Riley, thank you so much for sharing your limerick that you just decided to go ahead and write spontaneously. You were obviously feeling inspired, and that is so wonderful. We're going to use Riley's limerick just to think about the syllables. So let me read it aloud for you. There was a young boy named Riley. He was very, very smiley. He went to the beach and ate a peach, and that was the life of Riley. So you can visually see from the length of the lines, you can guess straight away that some lines are going to have more syllables than others, but you can also hear that rhythm and that beat as we read it. And so if we were to actually analyze it and examine it in more detail, I have changed the words in Riley's limerick to white that have more than one syllable. And using the hyphen have shown you how we can separate those words into the two separate syllables. All the words in black are one syllable. And so in Riley's limerick, you can hear and see that his lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, have 8 beats, 5, 4, and 8. And that creates that lovely rounded effect by the fact that it ends with it beats just like it began. So I think that's what gives limericks that kind of sing-songy type of effect. Okay, now this is a much longer poem, The Spider's Plan. You may have seen this before because this was in one of our Orbit magazines that you would have read this year. I have already written down the side of this slide, the number of syllables and beats in this poem. Hopefully I haven't made an error. You're welcome to stop and pause now and choose a verse or try and read the whole poem out loud and have a go, practice at counting the beats and syllables and see if you agree with what I've written. So I might just read the first verse as an example. Early morning mist about, dewdrops show their webs are out. Across the trees and through the grass, lines and lines of web-caught glass. Now I was clicking my fingers just to give it a sense of beat and rhythm, but that actually wasn't counting the syllables. So a better way to do it would be to potentially clap. Early morning mist about. And how many claps? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Dewdrops show their webs are out. Dewdrops show their webs are out. Again, we have 7. Across the trees and through the grass, actually 8 that time, a sneaky extra syllable in the third line. Lines and lines of web-caught glass. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So actually in the first verse, there's a bit of a pattern that you can see and hear then develops. 7, 7, 8, 7. Now, as you go on, you will discover that the syllables for each line pretty much stay around that 7 and 8 mark. There's a few differences, like the last line in verse 2 has 6 syllables, the last line in verse 3 has 9, but mostly the lines have similar syllables. I want you to think about what impact that has. What does that help with? Does it help the poem read well, sound good? Have a think about what you think the impact of that is. And does it depend on the actual theme and content of the poem? I wonder if you adjusted it and had a sentence, a line that was really long with lots of syllables, and then the next one was really short. When might you want to use that as an actual technique in your poem, I wonder, to create an effect or to create an atmosphere? So we can adjust the syllables according to the type of content that we're writing about and the kind of atmosphere, even emotion perhaps, that we're trying to portray. Now, your first activity today is going to be to look at this poem, Emu in the Sky. There is a copy of this on the document in your classwork, and I would like you to practice counting the syllables in each of the lines. And I will show you at the end of these slides how you can do that and where you can do that. Okay, so that will be you just practicing what I've just done with the spider poem. Yeah, to give it a go yourself, and then to ask yourself, is there a pattern developing with the syllables in this particular poem? But after that practice, thinking about syllables, so you're 100% sure about how to count them, how to use them, you're now going to try and write your own poem. Now, this particular poem is called a tanka poem, and it's actually a traditional Japanese style of poetry, which does have some rules. These poems, you might like this bit, are actually all quite short. They usually only contain 5 lines. And each line has a set number of syllables. And the syllabic pattern is 57577. So that means line 1 has to have 5 syllables, line 2, 7 syllables, and so on and so on. So we've got some examples to look at. Snow-covered pine trees line the frozen pathway home, but we turn away. The world is a lake of ice, and we have one warm hand each. You can see I've used the hyphens again to show you where I think a word could be split into 2 syllables. Now you can hear when you read that out loud, or if you listen to me reading it, that nothing rhymed in that poem. So that's actually a really good example also of free verse, thinking about what we were practicing yesterday when we were writing free verse. And you can hear that this is a beautiful poem and it doesn't have to rhyme to be beautiful. But this poem does follow some rules, the rules of a tanka poem. Let's look at another example. Waves that match the sky. Throughout the air, beach balls fly. Children laugh and play. Golden sands to match the day. Summer should be forever. And if you count the syllables, you should hear that they do fall in line with the rule of the tanka poem. Okay, so that last line, for example, summer should be forever. That is our 7 at the end. And you can hear in this tanka poem that there actually is some rhyme. So it doesn't matter if there's rhyme or not, as long as there's 5 lines in total and you follow the rule of how many syllables are in each line. So I'd actually love you now to think about writing your own tanka poem. Let me show you the document that you're going to have in front of you today. Okay, so here it is. Here's your first activity. Count the number of syllables or beats in each line and write them in the table below. So we've talked about that a little bit already. So in this table, for example, if you were to look at first one, and let's just imagine this isn't correct or accurate, but let's just say you think there are 4 syllables in the first line. Just put 4 in there. And then the second line, if you thought there was perhaps only 3, put 3 there. The third line, maybe you think there's 5. The fourth line, maybe you think there's 6. So you just write the 4 numbers for the syllable count together like that. Or if you want to, of course, you can put a space between them. Okay, so that's what I suggest you do. So 4, 3, 5, 6, that would represent the number of syllables in line 1, 2, 3, and 4 in verse 1. And then do the same for verse 2 and 3. And I'm noticing actually we only have 3 verses, so I'll remove that. We don't actually need that one in there. All right, so I'll take that away for the moment because that's not the correct answer and you need to put in your own thoughts. You're going to count yourself. After that, I want you to comment on your observations of the syllables in this poem. Is there a pattern? And if yes, what effect do you think that has on the poem? And if you think no, there is no syllabic pattern, does that make a difference to how the poem reads and sounds? So I'd love it if you could just write a couple of sentences there reflecting on the effect of the syllables and whether there's a pattern or not. And then activity 2, as we said, is when you're going to think about writing your own tanka poem. Now I've put the rules down here for you so you don't forget. Your poem should have 5 lines. Here's the pattern, 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. And then of course, remember here to change that to your own title and put your name at the bottom. Now, lots of you, as I said yesterday, are such excellent students. I would love you to consider extending yourself a little bit. So if you do that really quickly, and let's face it, a tanka poem is pretty short, it's only 5 lines. However, getting the right syllables could be challenging. But if you do it quickly and you've got some time left over or time on Friday between recess and lunch, this is one of the activities you could go back to. I would just like you to see if you can think of any other words that you could put in this table that would match syllables written down on the left-hand side. So any words that you think of 3 syllables, 4, or even 5, challenge yourself to see how many words you can find with those syllables. And is there in fact a word with 6 syllables? I'm not sure. I'd love to see if anybody can answer that question for me. Okay, so that's it. That's your activity for today. So practicing counting syllables, writing your own poem, and remembering to save it somewhere really, really important. Start another document somewhere where you can put your tanka poem next to your free verse poem and start collating them perhaps in the one document that we can come back to later on in the term. And then the extension activity for those that feel they've got something left to give, some creative energy left to bring to the task. All right, have lots of fun with that activity, and happy counting, happy clapping, and happy creating.